Okay, let's do some prep for In a Maze of Dreams. We've done 2 sessions now of play. We've gotten through all of the series kind of setup stuff, as well as character creation, and then the first obligation phase, and we're like halfway through the first downtime phase, and that's kind of where we're at as of me recording this. The VODs are all going to go up. I'm going to upload them all after I finish recording this so that I can upload this along with them. So this will all be available on my YouTube channel. And my hope here in going over my prep is to provide some extra context for playing the game, so that in the future folks can look at this and see kind of beyond just the explanations in the text or whatever of the game. This can give a sense of like, cool, how do you play it? What kinds of stuff should you be thinking of? What kinds of things do I personally think of when I'm running the game? And just maybe kind of provide an alternative to just reading or just watching, the session itself being played, that kind of thing. So a little bit of behind the scenes stuff, which I think would be very helpful. And so I suppose I should really start with a quick kind of overview of this playset and what it's about, and some of my kind of general thoughts on it, just kind of out the box, and then also thoughts based on like what choices have been made in the course of play so far. So this is In a Maze of Dreams, which is a playset that's inspired by the film Paprika. It's inspired by a lot of the work of Satoshi Kon in general, actually, because it just fits a lot of the same themes, as well as the Persona series of video games, and like Serial Experiments Lane, I guess, would be the other big touchstone for it. So it's about kind of the intersection of mass culture, identity, these kinds of things. And that we follow the protagonists, who are dream traveling sort of investigators, as they untangle a conspiracy. And the conspiracy kind of ends up being this mimetic virus type of idea. So I'm going to go through the choices we made and talk about them a little bit in terms of the setup, and then we'll get into some of the things that I'm planning for, or looking, I'll start looking forward midway through this chat. But so for our first thing here, we chose that the conspiracy is a single dream that plagues the world, with its impulse being to shatter the barrier between waking and dreaming. And in the course of play, some of what we talked about was this idea of like, the single dream that plagues the world is born of kind of like aspirations and some things that could be viewed as being positive, but that it will ultimately kind of fail to deliver, or will be more trouble than it's worth, or that there is some flaw in this goal. And so it's using people's desire to escape the crummy, lives that they lead, or the dismal world that they live in, but it is going to use that desire to ultimately do this very dangerous and destabilizing thing of shattering the barrier between waking and dreaming. And the hosts of this conspiracy are artists and luminaries, and its the like vector of infection is our passions and conflicts. So initially we talked about personal expression and idealism, right? Again, feeding back into that initial idea. And we mentioned the notion of like creative acts that breach reality, and that's something that I want to lean into. It's like the ways in which, like we'll see later when we were adding suspects who are like supporting characters in this series. One of mine was an installation artist, because I like the idea of there's like the magical end of this, of like these creative acts are going to literally breach reality, but I think in a mundane way it is still possible for people to like, you know, like if you go to art installations and stuff, they can create these spaces that feel magical, or that feel surreal, or that play with your sense of space and all this kind of stuff. So I like the idea that there will be some ambiguity, wherein some of the artists are actually just that good that they create spaces that feel dreamlike even though they're still real, and that some of the artists are actually breaching reality and causing bleed between the dream world and the waking world. And so I think there's a good kind of theme to pick at there as well. And so I'm going to be looking at ways to show that the things that these people want who are propagating this problem, like all of the conspirators, are going to be idealistic. They are going to be pursuing personal expression that is normally kind of impossible for them. They're going to be expressing all of the things that they can't give voice to others in their communication with other people. They're going to be giving voice to those things through their art. And so the conspiracy is going to be creating beautiful spaces, and is going to be trying to redeem a lot of things in the world. And then on the flip side, some members of the conspiracy will also play into this idea of conflict, I think, and have a more aggressive outlook, but I think always it will be grounded in idealism. And that's going to be powerful, and that also lines up with everything that we've established so far. And you know, we're still pretty early on, so if it sounds like what I'm saying is vague, that's because I can't be terribly specific at this point. We've effectively kind of only done the initial setup, and we're just entering play now, where we're going to get into those details. So then we talked about the waking world, and the things that we underlined here were media saturation and smog and haze, and so I'm picturing like kind of like a near future Los Angeles or something is what I'm ending up going to. And just in that more kind of not just smog from cars, but like forest fires. So like terrible air quality. Everyone stays indoors a lot. That their waking lives are kind of a sleepy, stagnant, hazy experience. And that the dream, as we'll see later, is kind of where people can experience like vivid colors, natural vistas, this kind of thing, are only available to them in their dreams. So everyone is kind of trapped in this very like sleepwalking kind of state in the waking world, which is, you know, ironic, obviously. And so I think ideas of nostalgia are going to be important in part because of that. You know, that like the world is kind of messed up, that we're in a bit of like a climate disaster space, and so people are going to idealize or be nostalgic for a time when the world wasn't fucked up, and like the natural world wasn't fucked up, and that the idea of escapism is really present in media saturation as well. This idea that we kind of retreat to imagined worlds, or, you know, that we are being told things about the world, that there's like a propagandist kind of element too about like the state of things that will come through in that. And so going down the line, we also know that surveillance and conformity are really important in our society, that these are like the two biggest prevailing forces that shape everyone's dreams. And so this is to say that like in the world that the characters live in, surveillance and conformity are the two largest kind of societal forces at play. So which means that in turn they shape our dreams. So this question is kind of getting at stuff about the waking world by way of this kind of metaphor of what we dream about, and that these are kind of the darker elements of the world that are kind of omnipresent. So in the course of the first two episodes, we talked a lot about the like surveillance culture, and Jess's character Saul is like works in that field and is surveilling people constantly. So this one's going to be very fruitful in terms of showing the ways in which the society is kind of dystopic and messed up. Surveillance as a broad kind of category is something that I feel really uncomfortable about. I'm not a fan of the surveillance state, so I'm happy to lean into that as a way to show, you know, that the society is bad, and that there are problems. And then Jory's character taps into a lot of ideas around conformity, because she's looking at what it means to be like an influencer, like an iconic person within a society where everyone is encouraged to be very samey. And so she's got some themes of like self-effacement, like that she doesn't really get to be her own person or her character doesn't get to be their own person because Spec, her character, is caught up in being an ideal for others, and so Spec doesn't get to be his own, doesn't get to express himself. He kind of expresses prescribed ideas. So there are a bunch of ways in which that'll come up. Looking ahead a little bit, these ideas, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but yeah, so the one of the suspects that we are talking about the most is Morgan's character, Laurel. It's Morgan's character's grandmother. Faye has kind of been the most present secondary character at this point, and so I think it's very likely that we're going to end up going into Faye's dream as our first kind of mission. And so I have a bunch of ideas for that as well that play off of these two ideas. So we'll get to that in a little bit, I think. And so then the flip side of what shapes our dreams is what do we hide from others? And of course, both of these things are going to end up being really important and present in the dream world. And so in this case, in our society, we hide emotions and authenticity from others. So, these are both reflected pretty heavily in the idea of conformity being so important. That your authentic self is subsumed by your kind of performance of the expected stuff. And that along with that, we kind of lose out on being able to talk about our feelings and share our feelings with other people. Pretty clear stuff. And we've seen it. The players have been playing into this stuff really well. The protagonists have been playing into this stuff really well. So I don't think I need to dwell on it too much. They wander in others' dreams to experience real intimacy. We can see why, given all the other stuff. This is something that is true about the protagonists specifically. And so this is kind of up to them to play into. I need to support them in doing this, which I think I am managing to do so far, but this is not so much something that I, as the director, need to be concerned with. Whereas everything up to this point, this is very much my job and my kind of turf. We're starting to get into things that are more directed to the protagonists to help them kind of understand what their jobs are and what they should be doing in the course of play. So I'm not going to spend too long on these ones. The characters that we have are Jory, who is a forbidden lover and a reformed conspirator. Her character is named Speck. We have Soul, which is Jess's character, and they are a best friend and disillusioned cynic. And then Morgan's character is Laurel, who is an oracle of the dream and a best friend. So those were the roles that were chosen. I've got some notes around this. Yep, so those are all correct what I just listed. And those, the playbooks that they chose respectively are that Jory's character Speck is an enigma, Jess's character Soul is a time traveler, and Morgan's character Laurel is a unlikely hero, which is a pretty fun spread. And the players did a good job of setting up kind of a triangular formation, wherein Jess and Morgan's characters are both best friends, but Jess's character Soul is doing time travel-y stuff that is directed at Jory's character, and so they're all kind of interconnected nicely. They all do morally compromising jobs, and so what we've established is Speck is like an influencer, famous person, an artist, a trendsetter, that kind of thing. Soul works in surveillance, and it's like in their obligation stuff, we saw them do a bunch of like data aggregation and analysis of surveillance information. So they're not like spying on people, they are processing surveillance data and doing analytics on it. And then Laurel is a columnist, like an advice columnist, but a lot of the advice that they are permitted to give or instructed to give is stuff that serves society's goals of surveillance and conformity. It is not stuff that actually helps people. So they kind of end up being part of a propaganda machine. And so now we can talk about the dream a little bit here. Oh, sorry, no, I skipped a question. So, in answer to how does the world see us if it notices us at all, we established that the three of them each occupy a different position within this idea of like being a public figure, or working kind of backstage, with Jory's character being the most kind of on stage, and Saul, Jess's character, being the most kind of behind the scenes, with Laurel being kind of in the middle as like someone who doesn't really get to have a face but whose words are known. And so it's complicated. The world sees some of them and then like Saul is completely invisible to the world, kind of by design. The dream is a personal reflection of the waking world. What is the dream to you? So within this, we talked about how the dream is kind of vibrant, colorful, emphasizes kind of the natural world or elements from the natural world. We talked a lot about like weather. I really liked the image of there being like multiple contradictory weathers happening at the same time, often in dreams. So like it's raining and there's sunlight at the same time, or I was thinking like it's a sunny day but you can also see the stars, these kinds of things. I'm going to lean into a lot of natural imagery, in terms of like plant life as well, and try to find some good symbolic flowers. Oh, hey, Drew. Thanks for the sub and for swinging by. Yeah, so those are kind of the like imagery sets that I'm going to lean into with the dream. They talked about having the unconscious tell that accompanies each of us throughout the dream. We established as being like, if you've been in someone's dream, or like in your own dreams, or wherever you go, the protagonists end up like a day later or 2 days later or whatever, like a certain flower will grow in a place that they have been. And so I don't think this will come up a ton in terms of like the protagonists leaving flowers in places. I don't know how much that is going to matter, but I am going to make the conspiracy have like a universal tell, which is I'm thinking of using sunflowers for that, because I really like the idea of like a field of sunflowers. They all pivot to look at the sun, and so it is they can take, like, they're normally bright and cheerful, but they can take on this kind of sinister vibe as being like a thing that acts in unison in large numbers, and that there are a bunch of kind of more bleak imagery that you can bring in with sunflowers, like once they start to go to seed and the flowers droop and just like drop all their seeds straight down and stuff like that. So that's going to be like a motif that I am planning to use, which I think I'll get some good use out of. Other things that I like in the course of this are I think like fields of flowers in general, the idea not of flowers growing naturally, but of them being like planted or put in rows. So like tulip farms was another thing I was looking at as being really a really striking image of just like, here are a million tulips that are all red in a huge block right next to another huge block of tulips that are all pink. Yeah, so trying to take cheerful imagery and make it sinister, both in terms of how I contextualize it or some of what the kind of trappings of it might mean, like this idea of if everyone in the conspiracy is kind of indoctrinated into this same single dream, that they then, it changes them. They don't have a unique signature anymore. They are all leaving behind the same call signs. They are subsuming their identities into this larger thing. So I think that'll be good. I think my players will get a kick out of that. So, oh, and the last thing being, so how do we navigate the dream? We talked about, which is in a very Persona video game style move, there being like screens or reflective surfaces inside the dream being some of them are usable as like conduits or connections between people's dreams. So that's kind of what we're going with as our mode of travel. And so I got to make sure I remember to work that in. But yeah, it's fairly straightforward symbolic language there. So I don't think I need to explain that too hard. Avatars. This is kind of the big deal stuff. And so everyone chose their virtues and desires. We've got, I think only Jory has named her character's avatar at this point. But I think probably I should talk about these conceptually for a little bit before I get into just the details of what my players chose. So, what is your avatar? A perfect expression of your identity and will. It lives inside you, but has its own thoughts, emotions, and desires, and is alien to you. When you transcend, your avatar manifests and take possession of your body. So those are all things that are true about avatars. And then here we have questions next of what dark secrets are they hiding? What do they yearn for? Why do you fear yours? And then the players each describe it, name it, and assign it one virtue and two desires. So in this playset, the transcendent powers, which is to say the like superhero powers of the characters, are gated behind the character's avatar, which is this alien kind of expression of their own identity and will. So avatars are about the like hopes and dreams or future versions of ourselves that we hold within us that are scary, and that are alien to us. So some good ones that I have seen come up in the past would be stuff like my friend Ash, who's a trans woman, played a character who still thought they were a boy, and his avatar was this like version of womanhood that part of him, wanted, but that he was afraid to become. This was the character, and so Ash was leaning very heavily into the idea of avatar as like an ideal that you do not permit yourself to have, or that you're scared about living up to, or these kinds of things. That it's a person that you will turn into, but you aren't that person yet, and so it is alien to you. And so the avatars all have virtues and desires, and the desires are all kind of fucked up. So you can see them at right here. And they are supremacy, apotheosis, adoration, intimacy, overthrow, control, scandal, agency, escape, prestige, indulgence, truth. Stuff like supremacy, apotheosis, overthrow, control, scandal. These aren't necessarily like good things that they want. They're very intense, larger than life in their desires. And their virtues are nice, good things that, people might want: elegant, clever, brave, serene, bright, curious, playful, beautiful. Um, so it's not all darkness with these things, but they're they're meant to be very extreme, in contrast to the characters' mundane selves. So in the case of, you know, what is the utility of avatars in the playset for me as the director? Um, these are ways for me to interrogate the protagonists about their characters' identities, and um, to kind of like threaten the influence of these kind of mass culture themes that exist within the setting, uh, and like show the implications of those things for the protagonists themselves. So how I'm thinking about that in this specific instance. Oops, dropped my pen. Sorry about that. We have, like Jory's character is a former conspirator, and her choices for her character's avatar are that it is brave, and that it desires adoration and intimacy. And so it's all about uh, her character's her character's avatar is all about a struggle with like fame, um, and the way that a person's identity is subsumed within the kind of persona that they have to put forward. And so the like Spec as a celebrity is slowly devouring the person that Spec is and replacing him. And that he desires, or that his avatar desires, adoration and intimacy, and is brave, is about like the thing that made Spec famous in the first place is, his art, his ability to kind of breach convention, which is why we see brave. And the motivations behind that were around, wanting to be famous and wanting to be adored. But I think intimacy exists in contrast with that in this case, because your public persona, if you become that, like that blocks you from being truly intimate with people. I don't think it's possible to be intimate with a crowd, stuff like that. So I think leaning into those tensions will be important, and the way that I can get at that is through one of the suspects that Jory established, which was this artist that Spec is in love with, who is named Plana Luce, this character, an artist that has transcended and lives in the dream. I don't think this character is concerned with adoration. I think this is a way that I can say, like, cool, you can dwell in obscurity in the dream with the person you love, but that exists in tension with you being adored by the world, or being part of the world in general. I think I'm going to try to show or use Plana Luce as someone who is just like retreating farther and farther, and like who is trying to escape reality and has succeeded in doing so, and is just drifting further and further and further away, and see how far I can drag Jory's character along with that person. And then if we're talking about Saul, who's our time traveler, their avatar is clever and desires control and escape. And a lot of what Jess was talking about was wanting to not need to do the time travel thing anymore, not need to subject themselves to, or like continue to do the things that they need to do in order to try to like fix time or prevent these dark fates that they are concerned with. And so again, those two exist in tension. That control and escape are incompatible desires is again something to lean into. And in both of these cases, the way that this will come up is, in the course of play, anytime that a situation presents itself where I can offer a really extreme version of that, like in the case of Jory's character, I can be like, cool, yeah, so, you can have, because I'll offer dark bargains, right, and be like, yeah, you can have extra die on this thing, and that might involve like being larger than life and bombastic or being seen by a lot of people, and is going to push Luce away, or it's going to alienate your fans somehow or whatever, right? Like to put their avatar's desires, the inherent kind of conflict there, to lay that bare with a dark bargain and say, cool, I am going to tip the scales in one direction or the other on this balance between adoration and intimacy for you. Is that something you would want to take or not? To keep offering those kinds of things, I think, will be important. And I think I'm going to have Plana Luce just like show up a lot, kind of like Maul in Inception, where she's just like always there anytime that what's his butt? I don't remember the main character's name. But anyways, anytime he's in a dream, right? Like his dead wife always shows up and messes with things and like tempts him off of, whatever task he's supposed to be doing, or disrupts the things that are going on. I think Plana Luce is going to be a figure kind of like that, this meddlesome, ever-present, spooky figure. Someone always eating sunflower seeds. Yeah, I think depending on the dream, right, the sunflowers are going to come up in different ways. Because there are lots of different ways for them to be in there. And yeah, I recently watched Inception again because it does have some relevance to this playset, and I just like hadn't seen it in a long time, so I thought I'd check it out. It's a fun movie. And the one thing that it really stuck out to me in that is the ways in which dreams are a place where we can be haunted by things. And so I want to lean into that with some of the hooks that like Jory has offered me or that Jess has offered me. Because something that Jess mentioned around the dark secrets that their avatar is hiding, there's this idea of like things that Saul has done in other timelines that are fucked up. And so I think with Saul, I should bring up every now and then this idea of like, you see yourself in another timeline doing this horrible thing that at the time you knew was right, and that now you think is gross or that you regret or whatever. I think I'm going to bring that up a fair bit and see how Jess engages with that stuff. And then lastly, we have Laurel, which is Morgan's character, whose avatar is bright and desires apotheosis and intimacy. Apotheosis being like a ascension to godhood. And so this is our unlikely hero, who is an oracle of the dream, which is something I haven't gotten a chance to lean into yet, but I have some notions around. And I think that this like outsized destiny that the character has around being the oracle of the dream is where we're going to see this idea of apotheosis from their avatar come in. So there's this immense power and responsibility that they are kind of destined to take on. And part of them wants that, and I think part of them is afraid of it. But their avatar is like super into it. And so making that power really big and really frightening once I get the chance to, it's going to be a big deal. Their avatar doesn't exist yet, or it doesn't get to show up yet, because they are the unlikely hero. They can't transcend. So I need to foreshadow this and offer kind of smaller scale versions of it initially, and then should Morgan manage to flip that move over and get access to transcendence, then I'm just going to go really heavy into like offering them scary amounts of power to pursue, but at the expense of, their humanity, essentially. And so keep it really alienating, right? Like, you can see all of the possible things that could happen, and like you could reach out and forever change, this person's dream. In fact, I think maybe that's the fun way to do it, right? To have it be like, you can do the thing that the conspiracy is doing, but like more directly and in a more horrifying way that's really dehumanizing for the people you use it on, but it's incredibly powerful. Like, you can just make people's dreams be different, like forever. You can change what they want, or what they aspire to. And I think that would be a really tempting power to offer. So yeah, I think that's what I want to do with that once I get the opportunity. It's going to take a little bit for that to come online, though. And so these are the things I'm thinking about with avatars. Is they're always going to be a source of power for the protagonists. And the reason that their desires exist on the avatars is as a way for me to complicate that power for the protagonists and to make it messy and uncomfortable and complicated, and to tie it back into their own identity, right? That they're drawing power from this like other self that might be, but that there is a cost associated with it, and that there is a kind of tug of war between the person they are and the person that they might become, and that these avatar desires being scary and larger than life is a way to lean into that and make it kind of scary for the characters. So that was a fairly large tangent, but we can talk about transgressions now as well. So how do we define the dream's form and order? Which is to say, in what ways do the protagonists kind of contradict this idea of what shapes our dreams? And so in this case, we know that they can avoid being surveilled in various ways. In part because they have someone on the inside, right? Like Saul is able to, I think, cover for them a little bit because of their job. And obviously they're all they refuse to conform. They are not, passively accepting that pressure, certainly. And they are able to kind of elude surveillance. And I think there's a certain amount of surveillance that occurs within dreams, which we'll get to with the conspiracy. And I think the conspiracy has trouble tracking them. And the game's mechanics reflect this because we have the darkness track. It takes a long time for the conspiracy to get at them, which is a unique thing, I think. So I just need to remember to show that every now and then, to keep them feeling a little bit slippery, and then have it blow up in their face later. And then we have what truths can we share only with each other, and so that we know is about them being able to like talk about their feelings with each other, in a very like soul bearing way, and we saw this in the downtime actions that we got already. Jory's particular choice, where she had her character just like deliberately watch a super sad, tragic movie because of how he was feeling, and just like reveling in the impossibility of his forbidden love and all this kind of stuff, and sharing that with Morgan's character Laurel. And we also got to see Saul's discomfort with that. It was a whole interesting scene there. And then through Saul's obligation, right, through their job, we see what could happen if anyone found them out. So I'm going to keep foreshadowing the kind of consequences that exist within the mundane world for them pursuing their life. But also we've established, at least with one of the suspects as well, this idea of people going dark, where they get like ostracized from society, essentially, which is really messed up. So that is a thing that can happen to people who play too kind of fast and loose with stepping out of line. And so we have one of the suspects. Let's go here. That I added, Vic. Vocal advocate for civil rights, forced to go dark. So Vic, I think maybe the connection with Vic will be that Soul is the person who outed them. I think I'll float that as an idea to Jess of being like, hey, are you the reason why, or like, are you the person who caught Vic and like snitched him out? And see if Jess is interested in doing that. If not, I think it's totally possible for Vic to just like know one of the other two characters personally. But I'll float that sometime over the next couple of sessions and see what the connection is there. Because I established Vic, but I didn't directly link him. And so we'll see what the connection is. And we have a couple characters like that, like Cat, an animal that somehow travels in dreams. We don't know what the connection is with Cat. Plano Loose, we have a connection. Fran, we have a connection because this is their boss. June, who works in their office, we have a connection. This is Speck's dad. Now that I have a name for Speck, I can update this. Speck's dad lives alone. So yeah, most of the characters are connected, but the two that I added and Kat are a little bit floating at the moment. We're not entirely sure. I mean, I think with Rip, the connection is that Rip knows Speck from back when Speck was in the cult. So we'll have them come up as well. So He Who Is Pale asks, is the plan that the sort of mundane oppression of the waking world would not be an active antagonist? So yeah, that is kind of the idea, right? That in any play set, pretty much this is true, that the mundane world kind of acts or exists as a reflection of the like magical darkness, but exerts its pressure much more passively. So it's just like constant low level day-to-day bullshit, whereas the magical darkness, the big evil that is embodied, acts directly and is more proactive. The mundane world just tries to like slowly suffocate everyone with its bullshit, whereas the magical darkness will like send a big monster to go fuck up your day or whatever. And so yeah, there is that contrast between the ways in which the two kind of forms of hostility operate. And yeah, that our panopticon state doesn't like either group. Yeah, absolutely. That both the conspiracy and the protagonists kind of would be seen as being problems and probably like lumped in the same general category. But that in its own way, the conspiracy, the magical darkness and the mundane kind of oppressions of the society are connected or work in similar ways or operate on similar kind of thematic layers. So our artist's conspiracy situation is still also going to involve conformity and surveillance. And we can see that there is a wing of the conspiracy that is surveillance. So there's stuff going on there, and indoctrination certainly plays into the idea of conformity as well. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the conspiracy next, I think, because it's kind of the next step. So, following all of the playset stuff that we just kind of finished going through, that was like our first session kind of ended there with making avatars, and then we picked things up in our second session of play because we were just had a slightly shorter first session, and we were going a little bit slow because I was explaining a lot of things for the benefit of the audience and everything else. So we got through filling out character playbooks, and so that's when we settled on Sol, the time traveler, Laurel, Lane, the unlikely hero, Spec, the enigma. We got all that figured out, and we also made our 10 suspects here. 8 suspects, sorry. And so the suspects are cat, an animal that travels in dreams somehow, which we mentioned earlier is not super connected yet, but I'm fine to have there be a couple of like weirdo outsiders that we can tie in. Plain Loose, an artist that has transcended and lives in the dream, which was Jory's contribution. This is the object of Spec's, or the subject, I should say, of Spec's Forbidden Love. Vic, a vocal advocate for civil rights, forced to go dark, which was a character that I added. Fran, an extremely invisible manager. I believe this was Morgan's contribution. And so this character, no one has seen Fran in person ever, but via like emails and all this kind of stuff, she is their boss. And I like the idea of they have definitely like seen her before, but they just don't know that they have, that she's like around and keeping an eye on things, very directly, as well as from the shadows. There's June, who is a student/intern who is earnest and peppy, and works with the various characters. Gun, a traditionalist, which we created this they created this in-game kind of slang term for them, so they're called mat discs, which is a way of saying that someone is like an old schooler, that they don't like being digitally integrated or super online. Gun is Spec's dad and lives alone. There's Rip, who is a macabre post-humanist and installation artist. So this is someone who, like all of these characters are connected to the conspiracy in some way that we're going to figure out in the course of play. I have tried to make sure that at least one of the characters is just like mega fucking obviously involved, but the specifics of its involvement are uncertain at this point. I think it's also pretty clear that Plain Loose is like super involved, but the specifics are not clear. And then Faye, who is an extremely online and connected grandma, specifically Laurel's, whoops, caps lock on, of course. Laurel's extremely online and connected grandma, who is a gamer. And people seemed really excited about Faye. It was just a character that everyone kind of immediately, this character resonated, and so I leaned into details of this character's life and stuff to set her up as kind of our first mission would be to go into her dream. And so I want to talk a little bit about the ideas that I have for that and why. as a way of showing like how suspects are meant to be used. So details that we've established so far are that Saul, and this came in the obligation phase initially, and I think Jess suggested it, that it was that this came across Saul's desk, but that Faye's whole kind of life was laid out. Faye's extremely online life is all, of course, tracked by the state, and so Saul had to run analytics on it, and through that we learned that Faye keeps a dream journal, an anonymous dream journal, on this website where people do that, which I'm imagining as being kind of like a de facto recruitment center for the conspiracy. And so she reads other people's dream journals and posts her own. And that we got to see some details of that over the next couple of like downtime actions and stuff as well. That she basically dreams of having a place where there is community, where she can take care of her, her family and her friends, and that this that she has this very beautiful interior world that no one else gets to know about. Even her own granddaughter that she lives with doesn't know about it. So she keeps it hidden. And I think I'm going to make it blend in a little bit of some like imagery from games, specifically like fantasy and role-playing games. I think I will lean into a little bit. I'm imagining that Faye's dream, if we go there, is kind of like an idyllic village, and that Faye puts herself in there in multiple roles, that she is both like one of the people, like she's just like, I'm thinking of like, little kid Faye who hangs out in the village, and then there's like a matronly Faye who kind of runs things and keeps social order, and like as that in the course of the characters experiencing this place, it will go from seeming very innocent to increasingly controlling and suffocating. And so I'm interested in putting that forward as an idea, and that it will be full of all these other people that Faye is taking care of, but that a lot of them will be conspirators. And that through Faye, even if her involvement is kind of unwitting, that she is like harboring or providing a means of connection for other conspirators. And that she is very likely to be kind of hapless in her involvement, but definitely involved in some way. I'm thinking that indoctrination would be a suitable place for her, because we've established this idea of her being connected to the like dream journaling website, which I think could fit into either acquisitions or indoctrination. But indoctrination is like the acquisitions I'm thinking of as being more about like material, whereas indoctrination is more about people. So her being like a follower of indoctrination or something could make sense. And that, or maybe a propagator, right? Like that she's in one of these tier 1 roles, probably in indoctrination. And then that's a good way to ease into the conspiracy map here, and that through her they might also identify a bunch of other people who are involved, because Faye's village is like a place where other people gather. So that's kind of my initial thought. around Faye and how she might be involved. And if we go into her dream, that's the direction I'm going to kind of push things in. The other characters that we might... So there's still the other half of downtime coming up. So it could be that, and I know that Jory's planning to investigate the darkness as well. So it could be that in the course of Spec investigating the darkness, we tap another character. And I think it would be sensible for me to kind of provide an alternative at that point. So we'll see what Jory describes Spec doing in the course of his investigations, and what other character I end up kind of sliding across the table as an option. But I think similarly with the initial couple of picks, I want to have it be a character through whom we are going to see like we're going to get a chance to see a bunch of other people involved in the conspiracy as well, but who's very low level. Or like maybe even not directly involved. And so the reason for that notion of like start out with someone low, start out with someone who is going to let us spot a bunch of other people is that that's going to act as a way to kind of propel us further into the conspiracy. Right? If we find one person and then those point to two other people, that's great. That means that there's thread to keep pulling on, which is important to keep the story rolling. It also plays into the mechanics of the conspiracy, which I'm going to talk about real quick now. So this is the conspiracy map. You can see there's the host in the middle. They're at tier 3. There are overseers for each of 3 departments: indoctrinations, acquisitions, and surveillance. Each one has an overseer. And then each department also has a propagator and a follower slot. So this isn't to say that this one person is the only follower. I think the idea here is that like there are a bunch of people doing this, but in the course of play we meet one of each of the propagators and followers. Followers being just kind of our rank and file people who are into the conspiracy and what it's about. Propagators being the kind of like foot soldiers of the conspiracy, people who go around spreading its ideas, bringing people in, that kind of thing. That these people are actively spreading the conspiracy to the followers. The overseer is like a little department manager, right, for this block, overseer for this block, overseer for this block. And the host is not the person in charge of the conspiracy at whole necessarily, but the idea with the host is that, at least for now, they are the person kind of most infected by this idea, and that everything is kind of revolving around the host. And that by confronting the host, we make meaningful progress at chipping away at the conspiracy's big picture goals and advancing our own big picture goals. So, why do these titles and positions matter? So, if you confront the host in their dream, that triggers the end of the season and we move on to a new season. So this is like the big thing that we're aiming to do every season of play, is confront the host. If we are too slow in getting to it, the host eventually comes and confronts the protagonists once the darkness track fills. So this is kind of the inevitable confrontation climax of the season of play. Overseers, we are at -1 effect against the host until at least 2 overseers are confronted. So the overseers protect the host. That is their main function. In addition to being in charge of these departments, as long as their departments are operational, right, because the overseer is still out there doing their thing, then that secures the host against meddling by the protagonists. So that's why overseers are important. Followers. Foes are at +1 scale until all followers are identified. So here we see the big distinction. There's identified and confronted. So confronted means that we actually went into that person's dream and, punched them in the face or talked at them or whatever, right? We have done something to call out their involvement and confront them about it. For propagators and followers, we just need to know who they are. And so figuring out their identity is the main thing. We don't have to confront all of them. They're very numerous. Propagators and followers also act... So, like, as long as all followers are not identified, foes are at +1 scale. So there just are always more people around. So when I was describing this idea of, like, Faye has a village, it's going to be full of followers of the conspiracy. People will be there. I'm imagining the like, faceless version of followers in this particular series are going to be people in suits or other formal attire with sunflowers for faces. Something like that. Some kind of, like, thing where in the dream they all wear the same disguise, essentially. And to have that be a reflection of Speck's Enigma disguise, because Speck is a former conspirator. And so I think his costuming signals to me what some of the things that the conspiracy values are. And, like, the conspiracy's look is going to be reflective of Speck's look. Which also works because Speck is an influencer in the real world, right? Like, these connections follow from the established fiction. So, followers are around. These are, like, the masses of the conspiracy. And then propagator. Fallout results are one level worse until all are identified. So this means that after each mission, reprisals or, like, badness that the conspiracy initiates are worse. That the propagators are out there, like, actively making things worse until they are all identified. And then there are the department level kind of bonuses. So indoctrination, -1 die to engagement until all are identified and the overseer is confronted. So if I want to not have indoctrination be fucking with me anymore, I got to identify this propagator, this follower, and confront this overseer. And then indoctrination is effectively shut down. It also chips away at the host's defenses because one of the overseers is confronted. And I need to confront at least 2 of them. And you'll note here, this isn't all of them. This is just at least 2. So the expectation is that within 1 season of play, a perfect run for the protagonists is that they pick 2 departments that they want to knock out, or that they end up knocking out 2 departments, right? So they confront 2 overseers. They want to identify all 6 of the propagator slash followers. So there will be a name in each of these spots, and that the overseer of 2 of these things will be identified and confronted. Will identify and confront the host. Bang. Season over. So then we have acquisition. Darkness track advances by an additional 1 during Fallout until all are identified and overseers confronted. So acquisitions actively hastens the host chasing down and finding the protagonists. And surveillance. -1 die to investigate the darkness until all are identified and overseers confronted. I actually forgot this rule last time, but I will remember next time. Jory will get a worse roll as a result. So, surveillance, right? We're keeping an eye on the protagonists. We're shutting down their investigations, hiding evidence, that kind of thing. I might switch what acquisition and surveillance do. There's a little bit of a uncertainty on my part about which one of these better reflects the identity, but essentially the idea here, right, is knock out 2 of the 3 pillars and go confront the host. Try to identify all the low-level people and get them out of the way. That's the ideal goal. You can still confront the host even if you haven't messed up 2 overseers, but it just makes it much harder, right? Or if the host comes and finds you before you do this, obviously things are much worse. Yeah, I think there are a bunch of video games that do similar vibes. This was definitely inspired by a couple different ones. I think I haven't played it, but the Assassin's Creed game where you're in Greece has like a similar vibe with like there's a conspiracy and there are people acting in different roles within it. There's a thing in Path of Exile that works similarly, so this is kind of my own spin on it. Um, but also in the work that I've been doing with John on Flame Without Shadow, which is the Bluecoats Inspectors Spirit Wardens thing. Um, at least at some point in the design, the Spirit Wardens kind of investigation progression thing was worked very similarly to this. So uh, this is also a Blades thing. So John and I did a lot of talking about like how to make that design work and the ways that felt interesting and stuff like that. Mostly John's idea. I kind of came in a little late on that one and did some consultational work on it. Investigate the Darkness is still a downtime action, Ash. So that functions as per the other playsets. Also, hi Ash. So yeah, those are kind of my initial plans for the conspiracy, some of the imagery I want to use. I think very likely we're going to end up in Phase Dream, but depending on Spec's investigation next session, I kind of want to lead with either Plana Loose or Rip, but I think I want Plana Loose to show up unexpectedly in whatever dream they go into, rather than have them show up prior, or at least not. I don't want to deliver any suspicion around Plana Loose right away. I want that to come up later. So even if Jory's investigation, which I believe she mentioned would be kind of involved like going into the dream or something, even if it involves Plana Loose, I think I'm going to point suspicion at some other character, maybe Rip, maybe Vic, like bring in one of my suspects that I've authored, since I've already pulled on one of the ones from the protagonists. So that's my logic, anyways, and that's what I think will kind of work most smoothly. And then, yeah, the goal is to have whoever this character is, have them be one of the low-level people, have them be like a propagator or a follower, and through them kind of signal a couple other characters who might be involved, so that at the end of that mission, right, we'll have confronted potentially one person, identified at least one, probably two, maybe three, and have some suspicion that points up the chain. So maybe one of the people we identify is one of the overseers, but overseers need to be confronted. So, right, being like, oh yeah, this person is an overseer, I'm not giving away too much progression, I think, at that point. But I would never want to have a mission end with, cool, the person you went into the dream of, they're not in the conspiracy. That's it. That feels like a really really fruitless bit of play. I don't want to have dead ends. I want to have things lead us into the next kind of mission. And basically, I think it's always fair to just like, anytime we go into someone's dream, they are involved in the conspiracy somehow. The most throwaway thing I would do is just have them be one of the low-level people. And that we always want to offer a next step for the protagonist to chase. I don't want to do dead ends or red herrings. It's not fruitful for this. And as you can see here, we've got 9-10 spots, right? But only 8 suspects. If we had more players, we would have all the spots. there is room for me to author additional suspects in the course of play. That's fine. If they end up identifying and confronting everyone, right, I will need to, for one. And I can even add more than 10 total suspects throughout the course of play. That's fine too. We're going to end up dropping some at the end of season, adding new ones, etc. So there's plenty of room to like add to this list, but the idea is that we at least have started with this much. And at most we will need 10. And so yeah, in as much as the like the wrapper is like, yeah, we're solving a mystery. There's no mystery, right? Like we know that all of these people are going to fit into this somewhere. The characters don't know that, but we as players, our kind of core conceit, right, is that all these people are involved in some way. And that if I ever am going to throw away any one of these characters and be like, oh yeah, this person's totally not involved, then I think it's really important that I add additional supporting characters who are involved in that process. But anytime I'm adding a character, they're like out of left field, essentially. We're not invested in them. They haven't been established. I know that the players care about these characters because these are the ones that we bothered to create in the first place. So I want to involve these characters first. And I want to lean into exploring these characters, talking about these characters, having them be involved, getting into the details of that. That's what the other players of this game have told me that they are interested in, and so I need to honor that. Yeah, I think Ash, you're absolutely right that like calling out this idea of like if they chase it, it is important. As Ash says, I'm going to add that somewhere a bit more explicitly. I definitely talk around this point in a bunch of different ways. But this is part of why it's really important for me to playtest this so that I get a better handle on like what are the things that are important to talk about if you are the director for this playset, so that I can then put those in writing and offer those to other people. So with all of that said, I think that's good for today. I did not make any new notes in my secret directorship tab, but I will maybe compile some of those later. Put some images in there, that kind of thing. But yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about going into next session in terms of the details we've established, and I know that at minimum we can go into phase dream, and I have some ideas for that. If we go into someone else's dream, I will need to make up some stuff on the spot, but Jory's investigation action is going to give me some material to use, so I'm not too worried about it. So yeah, thanks for tuning in and hanging out. All of this will be on YouTube. Essentially, I'm just going to do the first 2 sessions, this little in-between prep episode, and then I'll be doing one of these either between every session that follows or every 2 sessions, kind of depending. But I expect I'll have more to talk about next time because we'll have wrapped downtime and then done a mission, maybe not completed it, but at least we'll be on our way, and there will be a bunch more stuff to talk about. So yeah, the next session of this is going to be on Wednesday the 18th, since it's on like a bi-weekly cadence. So you can tune in on the 18th at 4:30 Pacific, right here on my channel, and then I'm going to have all the VODs posting to YouTube following that. So yeah, take care everyone. See ya.